Afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to Facebook Live. It is the last day of the month of August in year 2022. It's the 31st of August. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to introduce our panel and so I'll start off with April, who is a psychic and has quite a few modalities of healing under her belt and has been with us as a spiritual teacher and on the Facebook Live for more than a year. Good evening, April. We also have Ken back with us, finally on his road travels, who's part of our group meditators. Good evening, Ken. And then Michelle is back from her retreat and is with us. Good evening, Michelle. And then Patricia is here. And I have Francesca as well, who is trying to join. She's having some sound issues, but she will join shortly. She cannot hear anything. So the first question, April, actually comes from Nada. Nada was asking, so she seems to be attracted to willow trees. And so she was asking, is there like a significance to willow trees? Is there something, is there a spiritual significance? Because wherever she sees willow trees. Along with that, I'll ask another question. Another person, after we finished our Facebook Live, asked this question: kindly make the difference between ego and self-respect. And I'll put that in the chat. So if you want to answer Nada's question, and I'll tag people on the Facebook group. Thank you.
I honestly, I don't know if I would have to Google what is the significance of willow tree. I know for me, they've always kind of represented wisdom. They're a grand tree. They're very large and sturdy. They usually withstand most storms. But it would be kind of like if somebody wanted me to do dream interpretation. It's very hard to do that for somebody else because all of the elements in the dream are personal and represent something in your own life. So for me, it really represents wisdom. It's more of a grandmother energy for me, but I can't say that that's true for everybody. So I would suggest Googling spiritual meaning of willow, and or going inside and asking herself what it represents for her. If they're everywhere, it could also be a symbol of hers. If they mean peace, calmness, strength, it could just be a symbol from the universe reminding her. We have many different symbols, and some people kind of pick the same ones across the board, but my family kind of fell into that and did, like my brother, because my brother is very odd. He actually brought me a dragonfly one time. It was dead. So every time my family sees dragonflies or they land on you, they relate it to my brother. So I would ask her to do that. And then the ego question. So it's ego versus what? What was it? Let me see.
Kindly make the difference between ego and self-respect.
So sometimes the ego gets a bad rap. The ego is a necessary entity. It's a necessary part of being human. The problem is that we take it too far. or is that it gets wounded and then the pain body gets mixed in with the ego and causes havoc. But the ego is part of creating one's identity. It is what helps to individualize you as a person. And so in this question, the difference between ego and self-respect, there's that hint that the ego is something that's unwanted. And how do I create boundaries without being rude or mean or insensitive or my pain, the ego, the pain body part of the ego coming up? And that's really the difference. Is ego, when it is wounded, it is used as a protection mechanism. Self-respect doesn't require crossing anybody else's boundaries. It doesn't require hurting anyone. It doesn't require anger. It can be done with complete calmness and peace and oneness, to just say, I'm going to do this, or I'm not going to do that, yes or no. Eckhart brings this up when he says, I don't make any decisions. People ask me to come on their show or to do their talk, and I make no decisions. I don't immediately say yes. He's practicing self-respect because he wants to go in first. He wants to see if it fits. There's no ego involved in there. So that's the difference. A lot of times ego remembers a protection mechanism because we haven't been taught how to use it correctly. And it's wounded. Self-respect is loving yourself enough to set a boundary without creating any sort of harm or injury to the other. Does make sense?
To me, I feel self-respect isn't that something that you would kind of manufacture an identity for yourself. This is how a person who has self-respect needs to act and behave. Right? So once they start to have that identity is when the ego will start, because then we make the enemy, we'd make the other the enemy. We'd say, this is me. And then in one of his talks, Eckhart talked about true confidence. Where does true confidence come from? And that is that connection to source. Once we are connected to source and we have that presence power, then there is no, I never think that, oh, is another person, do I have self-respect, or is the other person respecting me, or do I need to have self-respect? So that wouldn't occur, right? When you're connected to source, you are aligned and you're acting like the divine is flowing through you. So you're doing right action. Every action is right action. There's not even a thought that, hey, I need to act out of self-respect. I need to say no. Like Byron Katie says, right? How does she frame it? She says a no is a yes to the universe. So automatically, because out of presence power, because it doesn't feel, when you're aligned with inner beingness, something does not feel good to your inner being. So you're going to say no to it, right? Like her example was like men were asking to sleep with her. So she was like, a no to you is a yes to the universe, right? So
I see how you're, yeah. And yes, it can be that way too. And if you have self-respect, then you have self-love. True self-love is not selfish, but it is knowing your worth in connection with source. And that is where you have infinite self-respect, you have infinite love, you have infinite worth, which will, in a sense, dissolve the ego, if you want to say, in this context, in this question, will dissolve the ego. So true self-respect. So self-respect you can equate to self-love, knowing that you are worthy of love, you are worthy of self-respect, you are worthy of boundaries. And we don't have to defend, we just have to be.
Mhm. Perfect.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, incredible. Thank you so much for that, April. Ken, did you want to say something about this? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Boy, good topic. I want to say, talk about the willow tree. I agree with what April said. It should be Googled or whatnot to see what's the significance or the meaning of the tree. I do know the tree well. Well, obviously, it's called the weeping willow because it weeps very gracefully. In my opinion, it has lots of feminine energy, and it does like a lot of dampness. It does do fairly well in wet soil, and the structure of it actually is a very soft wood. So just that definition of it being soft, and it really doesn't like a lot of wind. It will break very easily. The crotches will break and snap. So if you had a really strong wind or a hurricane, it doesn't do well. But I would be very curious to know what it means. But I do feel it's very, very graceful, very, very sensitive. And getting to respect of respecting self-respect versus ego. And what was coming up for me is I'm realizing that I have my thoughts, I have my emotions, I have my spiritual factor, and on being grounded. So if I have respect, and I'm going to say just what April said in the last couple of sentences, if I have self-love and I'm taking care of myself and I have boundaries, that I won't remark or say things to other people if they're coming through unconsciously, if I don't have to react. I'm starting to really realize that the ego will only react to defend itself. It will want to get the last word. It will want to have the right answer. It will want to make that person, the ego wants to be right and you wrong. So depending on how it's coming across, will have it will stir up different things within somebody. And so just being able to listen to somebody without reacting is showing me my ego is in acceptance. It doesn't have to let you know what I know. So it's self-respect is a self-love. It is being able to hold yourself or ground yourself around others without having a reaction. So it's something where it's amazing. And I'm going to go back to the tree. I'm just coming back to having energy around anything, depending on that inner magnet or that inner part of yourself. If you're drawn to something, it wants to learn. If there's something about it that within the forest, within the trees, it's something where you gravitate to. It's almost like your reflection. And I'm trying to put it in words, and I feel like I'm not saying this properly. I don't want to get off the actual question. I want to stay on the willow. I'm thinking of how much of the redwood forest I just saw and what I felt, and even different places that I'm where I'm at. There's some places I really feel good, and there are other places I feel something coming up. So I know everything has energy, and I'm really drawn to what I need to learn. And it's just paying attention, because the messages will come through the different energy fields. And it's just amazing. So I'll leave it as that. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ken. Amazing. I think it was the same thing when I looked on Google. It was about flexibility, that the willow tree is. Let me see what I responded to her with. There was something about flexibility. Then the other thing was that in Asia, the willow tree is actually used for mourning because it weeps, like Ken is saying. So it's used during mourning. Like the decorations of the tree are used for mourning, and it signifies rebirth and vitality as well. So if anybody's attracted to willow, then those are the signs of it. So thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Michelle, did you want to say something about this? The self-respect. What is the difference between ego and self-respect? Thank you.
Yes, so I happen to have 2 willow trees as you drive up my driveway. And as I was coming back from my walk this afternoon, right before this session, I'm like, oh, how beautiful, those branches that broke off. It seems this summer it's grown some other direction. So it looks so beautiful. It's still, the shape is still so lovely. So I was thinking about the willow tree. So anyway, and tying this tree analogy to this question of ego and self-respect. So yeah, I think when it's like the roots of a tree, right? When you have self-respect, those roots are drawn deep down into the earth. And that's how I feel like you're firmly embodied, right? In this beingness, right? So any doing comes out of that authenticity of your beingness, which is your self-respect, you know? And I mean, it's basically, yeah, what you and April and Poonam, what you had already mentioned, it's basically when you're really rooted in who you are and secure in who you are, right? Not in the material form or in accolades or possessions, or I have self-respect because I got a diploma, right? Or I acquired this title, right? That's not what gives you the respect. The self-respect is much, much deeper. And I think it's probably one of the most valuable possessions, I don't know, for lack of a better word that doesn't come to me right now, that you can have, right? Because you're grounded, you're rooted in who you are and secure in who you are. And nothing can sway you. The winds of the world and of this plane can't shake that from you, because you carry with you and no one can take that away from you. So it's beautiful when you have that quality that infuses your life.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michelle. Like a palm tree, right? Nothing sways, it just sways in the wind and it's still rooted.
Yeah, it's like
No
my
matter-
poem, I kind of shared that like a year ago, Roots and Sway. You're rooted, but you sway with the winds, and you're still intact. And you're still intact after the storm.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful analogy. Patricia, did you want to say something about these 2 topics? The other thing that I wanted to tell Patricia, I think in one of the meditations, Dr. Joe Dispenza takes us through the energy centers. And I don't know when he brought us to energy center number 2 and talked about that it is our gut, right? It's linked to the senses of the gut, our instinct. Gut, that's why we say gut instinct, right? And that's where, and it has to do with what April always says, that we come from a sense of lack and incompleteness, right? We are feeling insecure. So it's a sense of security. And that's when we are feeling insecure, that's where energy center number 2 is affected. People with gut problems. I wanted to share that with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I heard that it was a different meditation I did too about the centers, that the second center, it's the orange color, right? And it's with associated with creativity, sensibility, sensuality, and beauty, like being beautiful. You know, there's something. So yeah, I like the willow tree. I mean, I do like all trees, but yellow trees where that sensitivity and sadness, there's some kind of profound sadness, because I guess instead of going up, you know, I mean the weeping willow, because in Poland actually on the fields of wheat and other barley and stuff, you can see in the rural Poland, the farms, you could see the other willows. The other willows are really like they're shorter, and they have this little shorter, the branches going up. They kind of look like a funny brush going up. So, you know, there's plenty of them. So a lot of painters, Polish painters, would depict the beauty of that landscapes, and you see those willow. I actually painted also those. They're very pretty. So it's not only, you know, the weeping willows, but the weeping willows, I guess, maybe something, the way humans perceive sadness. It's like going down, like when your face is sad, when you're like depressed, your whole thing is like going down, right? Versus, you know, other trees going up. So maybe that's from what also comes from. Maybe we see that in that tree. And I like what Ken told about this. You know, yeah, they like moisture because those trees on the fields, many times the whole field is like very wet because it has lower things. So they do very well in that moisture. And I agree with April too. It's what you see. Like, ask yourself that the reflection that Ken's talking about, what brings you, what you feel when you look at it. It's really, right, the nature of personal reality. We actually make the meaning of it. So if it comes to you, you know, what are you trying to see in yourself? Something like that. But yeah, they're very pretty. I agree. They're very different than other trees. So maybe in it also. And I think that cultural, in some cultures, like there is the movie about that American Indian princess that married John Smith. I forget her name. There was a grandmother willow there. There's that image.
Pocahontas.
Pocahontas, thank you very much. Yeah, that was grandmother willow, and that's that wisdom, because how old, I guess, and how big. And some of the willows are ginormous. They're like entire, they can cover such big, so they can go very wide and very big. As far as the other question, ego and self-respect, I guess it depends how you define both and what state you are, because I would see if having self-respect or setting it up or defending and if it feels good in it, like good with the universe good, then it's coming because we are aligned, and maybe it's the protection of that life force and love in us, that we wouldn't, out of self-respect, I would not hurt another person. Out of self-respect, I would not hurt my body. I would not, stuff like this. When it's when it's acting towards good, somehow good of all, then there's no ego. But I guess if you have your opinions, or I would never do that, or I would never do that, or something, and someone is telling you to, then it's like, out of self-respect, I'm not gonna do it. So then it's that selfishness, and maybe protecting for what? Who's protecting it? Who needs to prove that, I have an opinion? So then maybe the feeling that attached to this in that moment will give an answer if self-respect is being part of an ego, or self-respect is actually has nothing to do with the ego. And like you guys said, it's being more of an alignment, but then there's no reason to protect it because it's given. It's what Eckhart Tolle described as high quality no, right? When you are aligned, you don't have to like defend anything and worry. The action will just come out. And I believe that the story also that I thought of with that question was when he was explaining that one Zen master was accused of being a father to the young girls from the village, and he didn't defend. He's like, out of, it's like, what? Why wouldn't do? It's like, why would, like, right? And they told him to raise that little baby for a year. And then out of that came all the good, because after a year, they turned out that some young boy was really the father. So they came and took the baby away from him. But in the meantime, for a year, this baby had the best master to raise him in that energy. So it's really, what's the point? Why are you trying to defend or have set up self-respect or set up boundaries? That's the question I would always ask. So I don't think there's like a general one black and white answer here. At least this is when I am at. I ask myself, who is feeling this? Who is trying to protect my opinion? Who is saying no or yes to things? Who is setting the boundaries? I know that even April, I remember you saying one of the seminars that, we try to put the boundaries, protect ourselves, protects the heart, and ego is doing that most of the time. And then does it work? Really not. Only when we are completely open and with love, and just then the protection comes, because it's not needed anymore, in a sense. So that's my answer. That's what I thought of.
Beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. So Cheryl says, respecting your own boundaries and beliefs of who you are, and not feeling a need to please or alter your own conscious state to appease other people's beliefs. Respect them for their own current beliefs and respect yourself. So that was one thought. And she also said a wonderful feeling of seeing others when they are wearing a mask, unconsciously reacting, having their defenses up, as it's their story of what they feel they need to survive at the moment. When we are awake, we see it and listen without listening and let it pass through. Even if they try and out a mask on you, we see it, very liberating to remain in great conscious state.
There's
Great.
still a little bit of judgment in that, and it's still separation, me versus the other. So it's a one point of view, definitely. I can see why, yeah, that makes sense. It's an understanding, but I still, that saying of Eckhart Tolle from one of his books that he lives as saying, ultimately there is no other.
Mhm.
So, you know, it's like, it's really happening in us. So what are we defending? You know, we're not that body. We're not our opinions. We're not anything that happens to us. So self is just a form of play. Ego is just a form of that human part of us that's playing here. But once you connect it, I guess that disappears, really. Connected to the source, realizing that you are one with everybody and your consciousness and awareness. Then like all the terminology and meaning kind of dissolves. Interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Francesca, I'm going to include this question from Kimberly you're going to answer the previous question and the
Sure.
question from Kimberly, which says, can the ego protect the person without the person realizing it?
Hi.
Thank you.
How is my sound? Are you guys able to hear me clear?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, because it's
Thank
the
you.
first time I'm using Zoom on this computer. So can the ego protect a person without the person realizing it? So I always like to use my own self as an example. So from my own experience, I don't believe that the ego protects us. In any situation, if I feel in any way, shape, or form that I need protection for some reason, I always, universe, which is my higher self, my connection to source, those are the energies that, I would invite. The ego convinces us that it protects us because that's how it stays in control, and then it feeds on all the things that we give it, right? But the ego itself I don't believe it protects us. It is our higher selves, that connection to source, that protects us. That's my, basic description of protection in that regards. In relation to the other question, so the difference between the ego and self-respect. So self-respect is, to me, it's a discipline, an embodiment, it's a state of being, that we come into from doing this work and removing all of those layers of, all the imprints from the egoic state of mind that we've programmed ourselves with, removing all of those pain body programs and so forth. And so to me, it's like the highest form of an embodiment of self-discipline, which equips us with real power, actually, and the ability to, which is the highest form of self-love. So also the ability to exercise what I often, what I refer to as healthy boundaries, for the lack of a better word, but it's us actually standing in our full power. And I love what Michelle said about the willow tree. I don't know anything about the willow tree in relation to, its meaning, but I love the way she, connected that to self-respect, because it is like roots, it's like our grounding. It's our, that state of being that no matter what happens, the wind, nothing can move or shake us or break us. Now, that being said, this question is so interesting because this is what I've been working on the last 3 days for myself. I'm often, like that willow, rooted. And but yet it seems, I understand, even though, we're doing all of this work, there are times when it comes to family, they have this way of getting in there, I don't know why, to be really honest. I've spent so much thought, and even, like every part of me felt like it was shredded in the last 3 days, because I was, doing really well, and in my power and all of these beautiful things. I managed to transition my mom's death and so forth, and then and she hasn't died yet, but I feel like I've completed that process, and I'm in this really beautiful space. And then all of a sudden I'm tested with my sister, who sadly is in her egoic state of mind, with obsessive controlling behavior. And so rather than, I recognize what was happening. So beautiful thing about self-respect is that pure awareness, that embodiment of that pure awareness, which we become aware of, which is why we don't react, because we become aware of the things outside of us, right? That's trying to penetrate our consciousness. So I was aware that this is what was happening, yet it took 3 days for this to break me down, but it did. And, and that's the human aspect of me. Slowly, what she did was eating away at me. And I was like, no, ego, I know what this is, and I was working on it. I was in presence, but slowly, every now and again, it would just slip in that thought, and it would just like start eating away again, and I would feel horrible. In fact, it got me to the point where I no longer wanted to be here. And I was like, oh my God, this haven't happened to me in like years. Like, why? Like, I was in this really dark, low. And then I realized, and it's so interesting because this question also played a role in the clarity of this, even a little bit more, listening to everybody sharing, is my egoic state of mind. It becomes very subtle as we evolve. It becomes really sometimes, sneaky. And so my egoic state of mind at some level had the need to be seen, to be accepted by my family, to be, and because I've always been the black sheep of the family. And so this need to be accepted by them. And, for me, I was like, oh my God, how is this even possible? I was in such a beautiful state of mind. I've done all of this work. Why is this coming up? I didn't know that there was that subtle, very subtle, still, energetic need to be accepted by them. And so it was that subtle energy through which what my sister did to me, it was that energy that gave her the opportunity to penetrate my consciousness with her actions. Because if I wasn't carrying that energetic vibration at any level, none of what she did would have bothered me. So to solve or address, and so to move this energy, I had to step into my full embodiment of that self-respect, that boundary, and everything that this work taught me. And so doing so meant I had to fully let go, not only of any need or desire, anything in even the subtlest form of it whatsoever, to be accepted by my family, but also, so realizing where they were at in their journey, realizing, the lesson for myself, but also at the same time, letting go of any need or desire whatsoever to want to see my mom or talk to her or have anything to do with the process. And this was like the hardest thing for me to do. Like when I mean have anything to do with the process, she's dying right now. So even though I've come into all of this wisdom and, I felt like, maybe there was a possibility I could have saved her, so many things, I've been going through the entire process. I had to let go of all of it fully without any attachment whatsoever. So I wrote to my sisters and I said, I explained to them, I said, this, process has been very difficult, and the way that I'm being treated, it's not acceptable. And, so I said it as, I wrote to them as nicely as I could. And I said, as a result of that, I've decided to step away from everything. I no longer need to see Mom, so you don't need to call me. I no longer need to do anything or have anything to do with the process. If you guys wanted to do the presentation for her celebration of life, take over, do all of it on your own without me, I'm okay with that. I am out. I've let go. And that was, my message. So I wrote it and I let go. And all of a sudden, as I was actually laying down on my bed as I was writing this, and all of a sudden, I felt this huge, it's almost like a return of energy, like physical energy. And I hadn't known all this time that this was actually, I guess, indirectly, it was draining me. And I didn't realize that's why I had become so low. And then all of a sudden, I felt like I got all of my energy back. And I was like, wow, And so interestingly, this beautiful being, whoever asked this question, it's coming up because I'm like, oh my God, this is literally what just happened in my life. So I'm using the example of myself because hopefully, whoever, is asking the question, they can relate to it, because I know even though, we come into power and all of these beautiful things from this beautiful work, extraordinary work that we're doing, we're still human. And, we still go through that, that wave, that dip. And I guess the last three, for the 3 days, that was my dip, because I was running this energetic imprint below the surface with my ego needing to be accepted by my family. And this work that I'm doing, it's not about them accepting me in any way, shape, or form. So that was the funny part. At least now I can laugh about it. It's about me and my own dream and desire and mission, and I'm obsessed with it, to serve humanity, which is why, I'm doing this. So yeah, huge difference between the ego and self-respect. And like Poonam said, self-respect reminded her of what Dr. Joe Dispenza spoke of in relation to the second chakra, which is, the sacral chakra, right? And to me, that's, when I'm in that, when I'm in my highest state of that self-respect, in my power, I experience ease and grace rather than that, floppy thing when I'm in the mind, at the egoic state of mind. It's a different vibration completely. And I've experienced her as the Kuan Yin. So she is the deity that arises for me when I'm in my highest state. And that ease and grace of her essence is the embodiment of that power and that beautiful self-respect, and it has nothing to do, with the ego. Anything outside of that is the ego in that regards. I hope this makes sense.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. One of the things that I think this is a tip from Dr. Joe Dispenza in breaking the habit of being yourself is when we, and to me now, it's not even a thought that's like pulling me, right? The hook of the thought and pulling me, even the little flutter of a feeling. So I've become very observant about my body, because Dr. Joe Dispenza says that the body will drag us, right? The body is the subconscious mind.
Yeah.
And the body is the one that is going to pull us into emotions of guilt or jealousy, or, all the what we call the so-called negative emotions. So the tip that he gives in there, and he also talks about it during the intensive and progressive course, is you loudly say change. Like the thought comes and you have to loudly say change. Again, the thought comes, at least we have enough. The incredible part is, at least you have the witnessing faculty, that you're seeing the thought that my sister is saying something, and that has a hook, right? And it's pulling me. That hook is pulling me away from my beingness. So once you see that hook, you say change loudly. And he says repeatedly doing that, that's how you recondition your body to a new mind. Then your new mind is actually wanting to experience the feelings of generosity, the feeling of gratitude, the feeling of being divine, the feeling of being empowered, which you finally came after 3 days. You took 3 days, right? But it may have taken another term he uses is what we need to do is shorten the refractory period. Like somebody, and that's a spiritual teacher. Your sister is the spiritual teacher. She's teaching you, hey, Francesca, you're coming from a sense of lack and incompleteness because you want acceptance from the family, right?
Yes.
And that acceptance will automatically come when they see how you progress in your spiritual path. And when you start to influence others in the world, then the respect automatically comes, right? Somewhere Eckhart says, what the ego wants, the ego gets when the ego dies. Right? The ego always wanted to be loved, right? Wanted that love from everyone. But once the ego dies, which you showed a beautiful example of ego death. Ego died. You lost that need to have acceptance from them. And all we need to do is not even, I cannot remember the words you use. You would just state your, still stay connected to your sisters. Just say, I love you all very much. And, but right now I need to take care of my own health. I cannot stress myself with this. So I let go. I totally understand. I'm at peace with my mom's situation. I'm okay with her passing away and me not being involved in any of the activities after a physical death. And I know the soul is eternal. I'm still going to be connected to her, whether she's in the living flesh, in the physical body, or out of her physical body. I'm always connected to her. So I'm okay with it. Kind of like very presence oriented message, right? Because then if we don't do it presence oriented and we judge them, then again we are adding reactivity. So karma, we are creating karma at that moment.
I may not have been 100% presence oriented.
Right.
Because I was in my mind a little bit when I wrote it too.
Right.
You know, I was raw, and so
message me and wait for a day and I'll give you a response. I mean, a lot of people message me and I always say something that, and I may not respond if I'm not in presence. I may not respond immediately, right? Something of that nature too. But most of the time, like in the morning or in the evening, I'm very much in a meditative state of mind. I have a very easy going, like my days are very peaceful. So whatever, I'm not very much into like mind activity. So most of the time you'll see that I'll respond something, and that's what I would have said. That's all that needed to be said. We don't blame them. We don't call them anything, because you never know, right, what this person is going to turn out to be.
yes, that is true.
Like
Yes.
Eckhart says, right? Why would this is talk of Eckhart's called Freedom from Thought? Eckhart says, why would I judge somebody? Like, why would I even have an opinion? I absolutely loved his word. Why would I even make an opinion of someone? Because you never know, in 6 months from now, a year from now, they may be the greatest saint or greatest spiritual teacher, right? They may end up having because he knows that each person their suffering will become their spiritual teacher.
Of
right?
course, always. Absolutely.
They're so out of their suffering, and because they're unconscious, they're going to bring their suffering, and they may end up being the biggest spiritual teacher. So it's amazing, right? So
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. So April, did you want, and Michelle said surrender is key, then grace appears. Yes. And I think she surrendered in 3 days. So, April, did you want to say something about it? Can the ego protect a person without the person realizing it? Did you want to say something about it? Kimberly is asking, our favorite person, our favorite questioner.
Absolutely. The ego protects us most of our life without us realizing it. The ego comes online at age 2, when the little person figures out that she is no longer an extension of the parent. That's when that happens. Up until around age 2, the child actually thinks they're an extension of the parent. It's like they're the parent's second leg or something. And at that age, that's where we get the terrible twos. That's where they say mine and no, and they start to want to wear the shorts in the middle of the winter, and they want to wear the boots in the summer, and they want to have their own identity. That's when the ego is forming. Most people are identified with the ego before they awaken, before they have their dark night of the soul, their spiritual awakening. And the ego, again, thinks it's protecting us. That's its job, is to try to protect us in any way that it sees fit. It's a continuum for everybody. So we have some people who are, super macho, super ego, and that doesn't just mean male, that can be female as well. And, they're big and they're tough and they're rough. Or you can have it all the way on the other side of the continuum, where the person feels like they need to give everybody everything and be super nice. And that is also a way of the ego protecting them, because if they are super nice and they give everything, then they think people will like them and will love them, and it doesn't work that way. We know that, right? But the ego still thinks it's protecting itself. So yes, absolutely. An ego can do that without a person realizing it for most of their lives. Some people, it's all of their lives before they realize, hey, this coping mechanism isn't working. So, and again, it's usually when like scenarios like you just described, where your family was doing things, and then the ego comes up and we're getting hurt, so that ego goes to protect us. But when we have suffered enough, and when we don't want to suffer anymore, and we woke up consciously, spiritually, we're able to have the ability to notice it like you did. You noticed it. She noticed that her ego was awake. She noticed that this was a defense mechanism. But you have to get to that point where you actually want to be happy and you don't want to suffer anymore, to where you can be able to notice it. I think he's one of the first people, if not one of the only people, that put it in that way. When you've suffered enough, just let us know. And that's, it was very eye-opening to me when he said that. I mean, I always loved Wayne Dyer. That was my first, and I really love Wayne Dyer. But then when I started listening to Eckhart, it was kind of like little slaps in the face, They're like, whoa, what do you mean? Have I had enough? And it really makes you change your perception. When you're coming out of ego, you must change your perception. You have to come out of the victim stance. You have to do that. And it's not easy. And you have to be able to put that mirror up. So is there something as too much as empathy? Yes, there is something called too much empathy. There is. Yes, too much empathy can be. Now,
You might want to read the question, April, because people who are online, they may not see this chat.
the question is
Thank you.
there such a thing as too much empathy, where extending too much empathy can enable unhealthy behaviors and
No, just, yeah, the end was I asked the question. It's the and I was typing and I left it there. You can delete it.
there. Okay, so there can be a thing as too much empathy. However, if you are on this path and you have healed yourself, you have healed your ego, your pain body, you have good self-respect, self-love, you genuinely know your worth. Okay, so you're doing really well in this area. You have worked on these things and you're really established in your own energy. You can have a tremendous amount of empathy, caring for others without taking on their issues. It's their issues. One of my people that's on like my list on top of all the other lists that I have that I want to do, you know, I want to go to Sedona and I want to go to Egypt and I want to go see Joe Dispenza, is Amma. I want to go see her. She has nothing but compassion. Empathy is very tricky. It's a very fine line because you can care about somebody, but you can't take on that energy. But if you are whole and you are well and you're able to maintain your energy and your alignment with source, and you know your true worth, then you can have unlimited amount of compassion. Poonam, she is a great example of this. She says this many times, that she now enjoys other people succeeding. Who does that in the corporate America? Who does that, right? Because she knows herself, she knows her worth, she feels no competition, she has great compassion for wants everybody. She does care. She has that empathy. She does care. But there's also a line knowing that each person's on their own path and they're on their own journey and their own evolution.
Can I clarify the question a little bit? Because maybe when I said where extending too much empathy can enable unhealthy behaviors, so you're extending empathy towards a person. But could it, when you extend an inordinate amount of empathy, can that enable the other person in continuing unhealthy behaviors because you're empathizing, you're providing compassion? So maybe they're taking it as permissive, like to continue the behavior because you're giving them empathy. Maybe that's kind of where
Empathy is the ability to feel what somebody else is feeling. It's the ability to, that's why we get the word empath. It's the ability to feel or to know or to understand what the other person is feeling. So you can extend empathy to somebody. So we'll just give a really simple example. Children, I understand that you're mad. I can see that you're angry. I can empathize with them. I've been angry before. I've wanted to take that cup because that's my favorite cup and I don't want anybody else having that cup. I get that feeling. I've been in that space. So you've been in the space, but that does not mean you allowed like the behavior in the child example. Such as Francesca with her family. She said, I understand what's going on, everybody's feelings. However, I'm going to step out. That's where I can get it. I can get that we're all kind of being silly right now. However, with my self-respect, I'm going to step out. So you can have empathy, but that doesn't mean that you allow the behavior. Empathy means you can understand, you can feel, you can sense what somebody else is doing or going through. And this is where I meant you can have all kinds of empathy and compassion, but you don't take it on. If I get too far into the feeling, then I'm going to be sympathy, and then that's where you don't want to be, right? Where you're really taking it on. Does that clear it up more? Or are you still questioning?
No,
would
it does. Go ahead.
Could I just add something to that? Wow, this is something that I've been through, and I've seen so many people that if you do give empathy, a lot of people are being confused on how to love, how to receive it, how to give it. And sometimes if you are giving empathy, it will be confused by some people depending on what they need to move through. And I know for myself, in many, many ways, I was confused. And until I learned a lesson, and sometimes I had to keep banging my head against the same wall many times until I finally surrendered and realized that I needed to go down a certain path. And no matter how much empathy someone will show or how much caring, it can be misconstrued and can be looked at in a whole different way. And it's amazing when you keep hearing people describe something, if I'm open and willing to really hear, and then able to feel my own subtle shifts or changes, and I feel anybody has to go through that, then they can actually learn the lesson if they're willing to really work through it. But so I'm just so glad the way you said this, April, and Michelle also, the way you're saying it. And that's helping me to turn things around and put things in perspective um, on some particular woundings that needed to be looked at. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ken.
Can I share as
Yeah.
well?
It's
Yeah.
a fine line. Let me just kind of circle. It's a
Sure.
fine line for me. Yeah, this is more about my relationship with my son, right? So there's a lot of things physically he can't do because of his condition. So I empathize with the difficulty that he experiences to exert energy, where some other person might be able to do it very fast or very easily. For him, it takes so much longer, exerts a lot of energy. So I kind of, is my empathy for him so large that I'm enabling him taking a shorter route, or like becoming physically, it's hard to put into words, where I might be enabling him not to reach his fullest potential because I'm being protective. That's where that's coming from, right? So it's a fine line between empathizing because of his physical condition and his limitations, but am I further limiting him because I'm being overprotective, because I'm over empathizing? It's kind of like,
You're acting on it. Empathy itself is not really acting, it's feeling, right? So you can still feel the empathy, but you don't have to act on it, since you still give him challenge to get better at something, but you seeing that it might be challenging and you loving him for it, but not necessarily giving him permission to give up. Maybe.
You do want to like the others. One of the things that Eckhart says, Michelle, is compassion and empathy requires compassion and empathy. At the tip of compassion and empathy is awareness. We have to use our presence power at that moment, right? Because the example, if you see, I uploaded that video into our group as well, what is true compassion? And he says it requires wisdom, because if you say, I want to be compassionate towards this homeless person, and that homeless person comes and rapes your daughter, right? So what is that empathy? So that actually requires, what is the tip of that? Wisdom is necessary. So you almost want to go into your presence, just like the willow tree example. I would say you have to go into your presence and see, am I actually enabling this behavior? Is he capable? Because we are not where you are, right? You are physically with your son. I mean, how can we tell you, can you push him a little bit more, right? But you are there with him. So see, am I doing this as an over the helicopter mom or overbearing mom that I want to protect? You know, what I see is ever since they were 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, we've been protecting them, right? We create the most softest bed, like give them the softest blanket. We want to put them in a very protective environment. So is that, and then the fact that he's differently able, so I'm going to protect him a little bit more because that is true empathy, but that's just a thought. He's differently able. No, there's a guy who is has 17 fractures or something. He's a singer. He's from India. Like, he's doing so much, but probably his parents push him, right? So it's something like that. Is it you have to be the person in your presence power to say, am I being truly empathetic here, or is the mother taking over, the motherly cultural mothering that we do, right? That we want to protect our children and give them the softest bed, give them the softest everything, right?
Yeah, it's a fine line,
Yes.
because it's keeping him physically safe. You
But-
know, I mean,
But you want to push him so that he becomes more and more independent in the world, so that he can live by himself, because you and your husband are not going to be here. Like, if you look at the chronological time, it will be that I will pass away before my son. It's not that my son, I mean, we never know who's going to pass away when, but chronologically, I can say I will pass away before my son, right? In another 10, 15, 20 years, I'm going to be the one that passes away. The other part I wanted to, so you're good with that? With that?
Yeah.
I know Francesca wants to speak. I wanted to speak on the ego protecting ourselves. The protection that you're talking about, April, that is actually our fight, flight syndrome, right? What Dr. Joe Dispenza calls our survival mode. We are constant. So, you know, Kimberly's, the way she asked the question, it almost seemed like it's a good thing that the ego protects ourselves. No, the ego protecting ourselves is a very, very bad thing, because it puts us in that fight flight mode, survival gene mode, that everything is about competition. Everything is about, let me scratch your eye out and let me get on top of the ladder and get above you kind of mode, right? It's the survival of the fittest, the Darwin theory. If that's what the ego does. So if we say ego is protecting us, the part that Dr. Joe Dispenza very clearly shows is if we stay in that fight flight mode, where we're looking at a coworker and now we are getting angry, we're looking at the traffic and now we are getting angry, constantly our adrenals are getting shot, right? The limbic brain goes directly connects to our adrenals, and our adrenals are pumping out cortisol and adrenaline, And that is very, very poisonous to the body. That's where pain, that's why he says Americans have so much pain, so much chronic pain, because it goes into the body as pain. And probably that's why Eckhart calls it the pain body, because we are in that fear, fight, flight mode. So it is not a good thing to say that the ego is protecting us. The ego protecting us is the wrong way to think of it, as though it is a good thing. The way the ego is protecting us is by being in this fight flight mode, by the survival mode. And what happens is every time that we go into this fight flight mode, we are downregulating our genes. When we are downregulating our genes, we are epigenetically signaling ourselves to cause disease. And that's something that we really have to understand. If we are in a disease state, we are in survival mode constantly, and survival mode will always put us, and we are not looking at all these elevated emotions. We already talked to Kimberly a week or 2 weeks back, right, about being in the elevated state. We talked about gratitude. I mean, y'all talked so much about gratitude between Caesar and Patricia and Francesca that the next day on Thursday, I went for a walk. I was looking at the sun and like gratitude. I got like tears of gratitude while the sun was setting. Like just looking at the sunset, I had tears. It's so beautiful, and just that feeling of gratitude. Go ahead, Francesca, you were going to say something. Thank you.
Actually, some of what I was going to share was exactly what you just spoke about. I was going to, so before I go into that, because it's very, very deep, I'm going to mention to Michelle what came to mind, or like what came to me during the beautiful share, you know, that Patricia mentioned as well, and actually what April said, which was very profound in relation to your question, was what came to me was, I understand, like I see you really, really deeply, because I work with people who struggle. It's different. It's not physical, but it's more like addiction and all of those things. And it's easy, like as an empathetic person, you know, like I work with, you know, homeless people, it's easy for me to get that empathy, you know, when I didn't have that boundary, or I didn't have that full awareness, you know, to get pulled in, you know, and become lost in, like Puna mentioned, you know, the mama bear wanting to protect its young, you know, state of being, rather than being in that presence, and nourishing his independence. So that's what came to mind to me, for me, like for you, is perhaps journal. How can I nourish, you know, my son's independence? You know, what steps can I take? So because you're an awareness, right, of everything that's happening in relation to him, who, you know, and I'm not familiar, so I'm kind of fumbling a little bit. So because you're an awareness of everything that's happening to him, and you're an awareness of this beautiful work, because you've been doing this beautiful work, right? You can experience empathy, and empathy, you know, it's a natural, you know, arising from that understanding, and you have that foundational understanding. And by nourishing his independence, you know, so journaling, how can I nourish his independence? By nourishing his independence, right? The light in me bows to the light in you.
They can't hear me. Hold on, I'm gonna.
Yes,
Go
so
ahead,
by
Francesca.
nourishing his beautiful independence, right? From your highest, you're actually coming from your highest form of empathy, compassion, and unconditional love for him. So that's kind of what came through, is keep, you know, journal, you know, meditate and journal. How can I nourish his independence? And being in that awareness, you'll be aware of of when you're being pulled, you know, because we all get pulled, you know, the human part of us, when you be in awareness when you're getting pulled out of that presence and nourishing of his highest conscious, you know, experience. And then that will fuel him with, you know, the energy that he needs to become independent. So I guess what I'm asking is very, very deep reflection and meditation. Going back to the previous question, just in relation to what April shared, which is very, very profound, and it just reminded me of something in relation to the egoic state of mind when it's coming into formation. So in Buddhism, they say, of course, pure awareness is embodied. One of the things I've come into the realization in relation to how we show up in this human form, because we are consciousness here to experience and express ourselves, right? And so one of the realizations that I came into a while back is that when we're younger, the egoic state of mind, after, let's say the age 5, it starts to come into formation, right? So different age, actually. So from witnessing my own daughter, and I don't want to say analyzing her, but it's a learning opportunity for me, right? As well, to see how this is happening as it comes into formation, like what's the ego like as it's coming into formation and so forth, right? How do we develop pain bodies? So I'm one of those 50 question people, right? And so in a way, her being, young and me being in awareness is really, in many ways, a fascinating way to learn, because she's growing. And I've noticed, the different age as she grows, her different, and the egoic mind comes into formation. So the different branches starts to branch out and go, ooh, now I'm 11 years old. I'm getting those, maybe little bits of the teenager thing, because this is how the external environment is influencing the shape of that consciousness, right? Based on the ego's interpretation of what it sees, what it perceives, what it sees, and the experience that it's happening of the outside world. And so based on that interpretation is how it comes into that formation. And that's what, determines our state of consciousness in many ways. And so it's easy as a result, like Poonam was saying, to become confused and think that our egoic state of mind is protecting us. In Buddhism, they say, in the Eightfold Path, they say, we're supposed to learn to, one of the, Eightfold Path teachings is developing the right mind. So what that is the developing the right mind is about teaching the egoic state of mind how to protect us, or teaching it, because we've allowed it to just be and, do what it does, interpret the world. Bye, Patricia. I saw your message for us. Thank you. Yeah, so as it's coming into formation, it's interpreting the world and everything around it in its own way. And if it's experiencing trauma and all, hardship as it's coming into formation, it's playing a role in creating that pain body that we carry, right? Because it's playing a role in programming our subconscious mind, right? Into the state of being that it wants us to be. And it, it's because it's in that fight and flight and all these, modes that it develop, it uses that. So part of its programming, it works beautifully, I say, actually profoundly with the pain body, because it plays a critical role in the creation of our pain body. And so this is why I say we suffer the wrong way. It's because we've been taught by our very own egoic state of mind, based on its interpretation of what's happening, the reality of what's happening, to suffer, basically, right? So as I'm playing the role of mom with Charlotte, I call her my Charlotte, and I know she's not my Charlotte, but so as I'm playing this role of mom in the shaping of I became obsessed, to be really honest, with protecting Charlotte's consciousness, being aware of what I'm aware of. And I thought, well, my God, what if we did it parenting a different way? Because like, say, parenting comes from a parent who is in awareness, what would that look like? And so that's my, I know, probably for lack of a better word, experiment with her. That's how I've been raising her. So when I see a pain body of hers, or a pain body's trying to come into formation for her because she inherited that energetic imprint from me, of course. And so she's carrying, subtleties of that energy. And so the egoic state of mind is waiting for the opportunity to, you know, wake up. And so she's in this critical age right now of 11. For example, about a month ago, I saw that a pain body was trying to come into formation. And so what I did as the parent, I just watched it for about 3 or 4 days. And I kept watching and observing, and I was making, you know, journaling. And then after that, I sat with it. I'm like, wow, I knew I was in awareness that I needed to teach her, right? Because her egoic state of mind was directing her interpretation of what was happening. And as a result of that, she was becoming very angry with her grandma. And I know she shouldn't be angry with her, and that she was misinterpreted based on the data her egoic state of mind was feeding her. So I thought, you know what? Okay, after observing, you know, the process that I was doing with her for about 3 days and journaling and, you know, sitting with it, I had a conversation with her and I said, you know, and I started asking her questions, you know, about the anger. So I guided her to go within herself, right? And asking her questions about the anger, and through the process of dissolving the pain body before it even happened, by teaching her how to, not only reminding her of the awareness, right? But teaching her how to see when the egoic state of mind is trying to program her the wrong way. And the wrong way is the way to suffer, because she's feeling anger and frustration and all of this buildup that was happening over, you know, her grandma, and something that her grandma did, which was actually in her best interest. And so, you know, her beautiful young state of being and love that she feels for her grandma and for her dad was getting torn, and it was getting ripped apart by what the egoic state of mind was feeding her. And so, you know, as I witnessed this, you know, for 3 days, right, I sat and then I went through that process with her. And so I was able to, you know, bring it to a stop, like the screeching halt, and redirect that energy and shift it. And she's been joyful ever since, right? And so I wondered, you know, as a parent, again, I'm like, what if we parented this way? You know, where would the world be? Where would everybody be if we raise our children, you know, from this state of awareness? And because we're aware of our own egoic state of mind and when it's coming into formation and so forth, and, you know, we've come into this wisdom. What if we start teaching, you know, our children and raising them from this state? Well, what would that world look like, kind of thing? So yeah, that's kind of what your April share inspired me to share, because I'm like, oh, I want to go deeper. Yeah, so that was
Beautiful.
it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesca. I think we are like over 20 minutes. So infinite gratitude. Thank you so much for sharing the insights and wisdom. I know people online have shared stuff too. April, Patricia, Michelle, Ken, and Francesca, and Sri Lakshmi is with us. Such an honor. It's always an honor and a privilege. Infinite gratitude. Thank you. Much love. Have a fantastic evening. Take care. Thank you. Bye.